in 3.2, why do we do what we do in the ag rural district? Well, because we have this discussion of preserving the rural landscape. And then in 3.4 of the land use chapter, we talk about residential neighborhoods. And down here in 3.5, we talk about open space. And we mentioned some things about the open space plan that was ultimately integrated into the bylaw. And if there's some questions about what the open space plan turned into and what it says about open space, I also have that tab for chapter 13 of the comprehensive plan open and can bring you there as needed. So procedurally, you had a meeting on April 7th. You considered this idea. You directed staff to continue working on it. We've done that, and we've worked on some parcel analysis and looked at the makeup of the parcels in the residential zoning district, as well as the nature and size of open space that was provided in various subdivisions in the area. And the staff recommendation for if an open space requirement were to be added to this zone would be to apply it for subdivisions involving parcels greater than 10.5 acres. You get much smaller than that, and there's not much to subdivide and or not much meaningful to provide in the way of open space. That the requirements for the quality of the open space match those in the ag rural zoning district. They're nearly matching now. We proposed a few text changes to do that. And the last one is a new one. When we started looking at what other communities are doing, in particular some of the analytical work that's being done in South Burlington, one of the findings in South Burlington was that the shape of the open space really matters. And when I bring those slides up and you look at the maps, you can see this, that a more regular shape, round or square compared to long and skinny, a round or square shape of open space will contain a greater percentage of core area as a relationship to the amount of edge area. And so depending on how you set that buffer, and the staff recommendation here is 100 feet. So you take whatever shape of parcel is being offered as open space, you buffer to the inside by 100 feet and measure the area of what's left, because that concentrated core is important to the kinds of values that Williston's trying to protect in its open space chapter and bylaw provisions. Things like wildlife habitat, contiguity of wildlife travel corridors, et cetera. They work better when they're bigger. So I'm going to show you a few slides that talk about that idea of core area index, but staff felt it was important to put that in as an idea to ensure that any requirement for a percentage be useful and meaningful in how it protects those resource areas that the town is trying to protect. So again, procedurally tonight, the commission could ask the staff for some more information. They could continue this discussion as long or short as they want. The commission could decide that this was not consistent with the town plan and let CRG know that and inform them of their option to proceed with a petition. If the commission does wish to move forward with the amendment, you could be taking additional steps to prepare that amendment for the consideration at a future meeting. I would add that if you feel the language as drafted in the bylaw tonight is what you would like to actually see in the bylaw and feel supportive of that, you can direct the staff to warn a public hearing of the Planning Commission, which is the last stage of Planning Commission procedure before this amendment would be transferred over to the Select Board. So I'll stop there for a second if there's questions from the board on procedure, and then I'm going to go over into the slides. Let's bring that back up.
Any questions from Planning Commission members? I'm looking forward, I've been through them already, but I'm looking forward to your walkthrough of the slides.
Okay.
And I'd also like to walk through the points in Chris Senesak's letter, which are all relevant points.
Sure. So, and Bonnie, if you see Melinda pop in, just jump right in and let me know, because she might pop in to answer some questions on this as well.
Okay, well,
all right. Here I am, and I'm going to make these as big as I can on this screen as well. Maybe there. Hopefully the text is nice and big on these anyway. So this is a bit of an addition to and a revision to some of the slides that were put together for you back in April. And the first slide is about that parcel size distribution. So the darkest of the red parcels are the ones we're talking about and proposing for applicability of this rule. Those are all of the parcels in the residential zoning district that are larger than 10.5 acres in size. And you can see that, you know, by the numbers, there's lots and lots of little parcels because there's lots and lots of residential subdivision in this district. There's a few medium-sized parcels and a few that are a little bit bigger. And then there are these large ones where there appears to be, you know, significant opportunity for open space pattern subdivisions. But when you go and look at what's already been protected, you think about how much red you just saw, you can see here all of these parcels in the teal are already protected open space, either through initiative of the town or in most cases provided as part of the approval of a residential subdivision in the town, or, you know, for example, the Allenbrook School property, conveyed to the town as part of the Mahan Farm, as well as Burnett property, and this area over here as a condition of approval of development that wasn't in the residential zoning district. So we do have a lot of land protection in this district. The remaining big red parcels are the ones where this requirement would play out. So we're down to, I don't know, fewer than a dozen here. So the other way to look at it is just look at what is subdividable. So again, this is all different parcel sizes. We've taken the protected land out. We've taken out anything in the district that is too small to subdivide. So this is everything in the RZD in Williston that's big enough to have any kind of subdivision at all. And again, the dark red are the large ones. And then this is just done by number of acres. So we were looking here at if we imagined everything in the RZD to be subdivided under these requirements, what would the town see in terms of protected open space? So what you're seeing here is if you protected all of the parcels that are bigger than 5 but smaller than 10.5 acres at 25% or 50% or 75%, this is the total number of acres of permanently protected open space that would yield if all of those parcels were subdivided and required to provide open space. And then the staff recommended threshold at 10.5 acres. So starting with larger parcels, and there's 11 of them in the town, fewer than a dozen, 103, 207, or 310 acres, depending on there. So the bylaw amendment as drafted for consideration would target this 207. And again, that only happens if the rest of those the remainder of those parcels is developed. And below that, we just wanted to identify some of the percentages that the town has seen in past subdivisions that you might be familiar with. And I think, interestingly enough, there's not really a trend across time here. We have early subdivisions that preserved quite a lot of open space. Old Stage Estates at 62%. We have newer subdivisions, Coyote Run, that preserve a smaller percentage. And then we get to just going through those examples of how the open space was configured. So in all of these, you're seeing the entire parent parcel, and what's been grayed out or highlighted in the next few is the protected open space. Pleasant Acres, Old Stage Estates. This is our one at 62%. Southridge, Brennan Woods, Coyote Run, which is one of the ones with the smaller amount of open space. So, you know, as I was mentioning before, this discussion of shape, open space configuration varies really wildly. and that matters, and that the better quality open space to achieve the resource protection goals of the town is the unfragmented open space. As an added bonus, when you have unfragmented open space, you have better opportunity for human recreation as well, better opportunity to connect paths or provide significant parklands or trail systems. So, it was the strong opinion of the staff working through this that the configuration of the open space needs to be addressed if there was a desire to protect resources with an open space requirement. And we would say the same thing about the agricultural rural residential zoning district, where we also don't do anything about core area right now. But I would table that to a later discussion. We're getting 75% in the ag rural district, but we have seen some subdivisions where the staff certainly looked at the shape of the open space and thought, well, that really kind of chops it up, and that might be something to look at later. So looking at that configuration, how do you turn that into regulatory language? The option we landed on to recommend was this core area index. And part of it is that it's simple. We're able to do it in-house with our mapping, or any engineer proposing a subdivision would be able to do it. And so you basically are buffering the edge of the proposed open space parcel and understanding that lands within a certain distance of that edge, although they're protected open space, they're pretty heavily impacted by the development around them. And that what really matters is the core area that you get in the interior of that. So this is how you do a core area index. Take the land that's within 100 feet of the edge, take that out, look at the acreage you have left and what percentage is that of the open space that's being provided. And the nice thing is, as a percentage, it's relative, it's independent of the total size. Shape matters. Here's the example, 2 projects right near each other, Heritage Meadow, Brennan Woods, 3 projects, Heritage Meadow, Brennan Woods, and Old Stage Estates. So if you look at that, you can see that the core of something like Heritage Meadow is really quite small. There's a lot of edge, similar in Brennan Woods, but a little better. And then if you look at that chunk of open space that was provided as part of Old Stage Estates, it's really a big, significant, consolidated piece of open space. And you can imagine the sorts of wildlife habitat resources or recreational opportunities you could map onto something like that when it's big, as opposed to what you might be able to accomplish with something like this up in Heritage Meadow. So we ran those numbers on a couple of existing subdivisions, just again to give the Planning Commission a basis for comparison. So we're looking at the total acres of the open space that was provided, and then what's that core area index. And we tried it at 50 feet and we tried it at 100 feet. And so those are just two different buffer sizes that take out more or less edge from those parcels. The bylaw revision as drafted uses the 100-foot metric, and then a minimum 35% in the staff recommendation right now. So that's where we've landed. The recommendation in the bylaw, the draft as requested for the Planning Commission to consider, remains at the 50% number, but the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission also consider this core area index number to ensure that what is provided is of a fairly high quality. That's everything I've got coming out of the slideshow. So I'll stop there for a minute. I know this raises some questions that were also brought up in some of the correspondence to the board tonight. For example, how much of that open space is just a result of the amount of constrained land on the parent parcels and some things like that. And I can speak to that, but I know it's addressed directly in Mr. Senesak's letter, so I might wait till I've got that letter up to go into that a little bit.
I have a question. Okay. So is there any precedent, Matt, for removing from the calculation any area that is completely surrounded by residential uses. Like you look at that Brennan Woods shading.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can pull that back up. Yeah. So those spots in the middle, for the goals that we're trying to achieve, those are really pretty useless. And I wonder if that could be an additional consideration where it's not just about the core area index, which I really like, but is also eliminating, these kind of like tiny little chunks that get left behind when you put a couple of cul-de-sacs headed toward each other.
Sure. Well, right now in the ag rural district where we do require this quantitative amount of open space, we don't have anything that would take a little interim chunk like that out. And I'd encourage any of you who have access to our parcels to look at the map of Meadow Ridge to see some really funky little skinny fingers of open space kind of all interspersed throughout the lots. And it's a lot of acreage, but it doesn't do much but buffer people from one another. The analytical work that was just done for the city of South Burlington, which is really trying to get at wildlife habitat, where that sort of consolidation of open space and connectivity of open space is really critical, certainly starts to address that. That has not, to my knowledge, been turned into regulatory language in South Burlington yet. And what I would say is if the Planning Commission was interested in something like that, for example, if you said, well, we want to require some open space, but we don't want this kind of open space to count, we could look at some of these projects. For example, we could look at old stage estates and say, maybe we're not going to count some of these little ones, but we are going to count that. But we might want to look at that overall percentage at that point and say, well, does requiring 50% really fit the pattern anymore? It might be a lower overall percentage because you're not counting as much of it.
Okay, thanks for that. I hope that as we move forward that point comes up again, because I'm definitely in favor of tighter clustering of houses in order, in part, to keep more contiguous open space, and love to see some kind of element in our calculations that accommodates that.
Sure. I will say the other tool we use in the ag rural district is there is a requirement, not entirely a black and white requirement, but a pretty strong one, that open space be designed in such a way that it's adjacent to any other protected open space. So, one of the other findings in South Burlington was a lot of these resources don't begin and end at parcel lines. And you want to try to coordinate between different developments that might happen at different points in time. So that might be another piece of that consideration, would be to say, well, this is small, but it's right next to somebody else's protected open space, and therefore it might have some significance.
I was going to bring that up as well. For instance, if you look on what's on the screen now on Heritage Meadow, to the northeast, there is some protected land that's not. Oh, is that part of Heritage Meadows' original land?
What's up here, Chapin?
Yeah, or was that part of what's on that lane up there?
I think that's part of Pleasant Acres.
Yes. So if you took away the 100-foot buffer between both of those, that makes that a larger piece there.
Right.
And I feel as though we shouldn't be doing edges where it goes against other protected land. I also do want to comment that I agree with the comment with you, Megan, about not wanting small isolated things that are surrounded by homes, but I also don't want to call the two larger ones in Brennan Woods small, because when you realize there's 100 feet of white space and then the green space there's actually several hundred feet of space in there. But they are certainly not very useful as wildlife corridors when they are completely surrounded by homes and roads. I agree. By the way, on the old stage estates one, could you just trace with your pointer where the rec path goes? Because some of that land is now the disc golf.
Yeah, in fact, let me bump back up here. I think I can show you with the aerial imposed over it. There we go.
There, yes.
So there's your rec path. And remember, this is the Allen Brook. So to that point of a lot of the land in that block that was set aside as open space was also not developable because it was within the 150-foot regulatory buffer to the Allen Brook. But there was certainly, some stuff over here. I will say a lot of this is pretty soggy as well. So, this is, we have open space. Not all of it was set aside just out of the, sort of the desire to set aside open space. Some of it was set aside because it wasn't a good place to build a house.
Other questions or comments, or do you have more to present, Matt?
I have a couple of other things I want to just show up on the screen, and I can do those pretty quickly.
Can I ask a question in terms of if we were to consider this, is there any reason, even if it doesn't have significant number of parcels, but not to include the village center, the village district?
Going back, I'm trying to think. I think I had one of these that shaded some of the village parcels.
Yes, right there.
So what's teal in the village here, and basically the village is this shape going all the way to the highway. So keeping in mind that the slightly darker orange parcels like these I'm pointing to, those are at that 5 to 10.5, so more than 5 acres. We don't have any of those that are unprotected in the village. So at a 10.5 acre threshold, it simply wouldn't cover the village by the nature of the size of parcels that are already there.
Right. Megan, aren't you close to that?
No, we're only 3.5.
Okay.
Someone else was speaking up.
I just want to give us a time reminder. Are some of us or all of us trying to go to the select board meeting, or I'm sorry, I was a little unclear on that.
Yes, we're going to pause when we get a text from Emily.
Oh, I see. Okay, there's the text I didn't hear about.
Melinda just jumped in, by the way.
Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah. So, Melinda, if you can hear me as you're coming in, I've been through the slides with the commission, and we're just answering a few questions about those. Feel free to jump in, and then I'm just going to move on to the draft bylaw and then Mr. Senesak's letter.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So, what, if any, impact, or is there any way to know the impact, the financial impact on the folks who own those larger parcels?
Sure. Down to the dollars and cents, probably not. But what I would say is imposing a requirement of a certain amount of open space will, on at least some parcels, push for a configuration of units, a layout of units that might not have otherwise been considered. As I've sort of emphasized throughout, this rule change would not change the number of units that are allowed on a parcel, but somebody who could get a number of units in, say, like the Catamount Golf proposal, single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, to get that same exact number of units on a smaller amount of the parcel they might have to build in a more dense format. And at some point, someone would be making some choices and some trade-offs between, do I want to build single-family homes, duplexes, and triplexes, but maybe build fewer of them, or do I want to build a building type that's different, a building, an 8-plex apartment or something like that. All of those housing types are allowed in this district. What we have are dimensional standards, and the biggest one on a residential project would be the 36-foot height limit. You can't do much more than 3 stories under a flat roof in 36 feet.
One other question, Matt, is what's to prevent somebody who has an 11-acre parcel from subdividing it into 2 in order to then duck under this requirement if we put it in?
So the way it works in the ag rural and the way it would work here is that 2-lot subdivision would subject that parent parcel to the open space set aside requirement. So any division of that parcel, and that's actually a good thing, because if somebody does want to do something like, knock off a lot for a family member, it encourages them, it really requires them to do some long range planning about where development might go on the remainder of the parcel, even if that's not in their plans today, because they're going to have to commit to the open space up front. And we've had a number of subdivisions in the ag rural district where exactly that has happened.
Thanks.
Yep. So I think I'll just move on really quickly to make sure I'm showing everybody the revision document.
Sure.
I'm not going to go, oh, sorry, that's my parking one. There we are, residential. We have to go a little ways into this chapter. How much open space must be conserved? We have the 10.5 acre threshold.
Don't forget to magnify.
Thank you, Chapin. I got it. See, I've got a big monitor at home, so it already looks
That's
good
great.
to me.
Thank you.
So this calls out the 10.5 acre threshold in this proposed new paragraph. What's being stricken up here is the paragraph that says we don't have a quantitative requirement. What's being added is the paragraph that says for developments of parcels greater than 10.5 acres in size, we do have a quantitative requirement at 50%. That's the number right there. And then we say, that it needs to be shown on the concept plan and on all plans submitted with the application for discretionary permit on the approved final plan. Then a little bit of cleanup of the language that describes the kinds of lands that need to be included in the open space, and a little bit of removal. I had recommended this. We used to have this sort of to the extent consistent with the landowner's right to beneficial use of his or her property. I think one of the pieces of input we keep hearing is within these open space criteria, if you say that, it really removes a lot of the incentive to actually protect that resource. And you get arguing about, subjective measures of what is the right to beneficial use of the property. So what we remain with, though, is to say, adding if a landowner only has significant wildlife habitat. In other words, if the whole parcel is identified that way, the development would be allowed to the extent consistent with the right to beneficial use of their property. So, we've done this a little bit in ag rural with things like steep slopes. If the whole lot is steep, we'll try every conservation measure we can, but eventually you've got to let somebody build something, and you figure it out. Same kind of language around unique natural communities. And then no changes. This language is just being renumbered, but these descriptions of these resource areas about view sheds, visual impacts, farmlands of local importance are all already in the bylaw. It just now becomes part of that required percentage of open space. Similar change here about the beneficial use statement when we start talking about very steep slopes. I think if you were to look in the RZD, there actually are very few places that have really steep slopes, but the language is there. and there is a reduction in density for development that happens on steep slopes down to 1 dwelling unit per acre. And I think that's added there, but I believe that's a quote from something that was already in chapter 19, the density chapter of the bylaw. We're just restating it there. We adopt a little bit of the language about contiguity here and remove some of the squishiness about this, replacing it with this measurement of the core area index. And this requirement is currently set at 35%. So 50% of the whole parcel is open space, 35% of the open space minimum has to meet this core area requirement under this draft. And then we just renumber down into what you're allowed to do with open space. And then this language describes how the open space can be protected. And this is, I believe, word for word, a quote from chapter 31. In fact, there's a 31 that we would exercise from it. That should be a 39. That's how I know it came from the bylaw. You do adopt a requirement that the protected open space be platted as a separate lot. That was a change that was made in Ag World in the last few years. And although it sometimes results in some challenging subdivision plats, the idea that that open space ends up on a parcel that is owned by someone or in common by the association rather than a designation that might exist over a bunch of backyards of houses. We think there's better enforcement of not encroaching in the open space when it's its own parcel. And, you know, must it be surveyed and monumented? Yes. And that's, again, a straight copy of what it says in the Ag Rural District where we have this requirement. And I think that's all of 39.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there real quick. The last piece of material I have is Mr. Senesak's letter, and then that could segue into more general conversation. And you're probably going to be looking for some comment. We may want to talk to Chapin about if some of you head over to the Energy Committee, are there enough Planning Commission members left here to continue that conversation and public input? And we're hoping that we're coming back.
Yes. I don't know if we should count on coming back, though, depending on how long it takes to get there, because I know they're dealing with the airport noise monitoring question, and that I know could go long.
Yeah.
I felt as though Chris Senesak's letter itemized all of the reasons why we might not want to do this very eloquently. And I'm not saying that I agree that we shouldn't do it, but I thought they were a really good discussion starting points. So I'm fine with going through it as first of all, I want to clarify that if we made this change, it would have no effect on the current project that he's doing in the golf course, yes?
It actually would, Chapin.
Oh.
So in Williston's bylaws, projects are not vested in the version of the bylaws that is applicable until those projects have filed a complete application for a discretionary permit. So because of our growth management system, the Catamount Golf Project will not be in a position to file for a discretionary permit until probably at least the middle of April 2021. So, you know, should this change move through the process and be adopted by the select board prior to that time, it would apply to the Catamount Golf Project.
And that parcel is more than 10.5 acres even after the subdivision?
Well, it is. So, and that's an important point of clarification. There's a large parcel there. There's a proposal to subdivide that parcel and then apply the development standards to, you know, one of the new 2 created parcels to create this development with the remainder of the golf course existing on the other part.
So that subdivision has not already happened, even though I saw that presented to the DRB last year or so?
It's been presented as a pre-application. The pre-application review has actually not yet concluded. And probably the DRB will be issuing a notice of decision on it before the end of June. And I did just get a message from Emily, so I think she's getting started next door.
Okay.
And I don't know, are all of the Planning Commission members hoping to head over?
I'd like to go over, but I would be fine if the discussion continues. Does anyone else want to go over?
Well, we would presumably need a quorum here, right? If we're conducting public business.
It would be better that you have one.
Right. And so with 7 members, we would need 4 of us to stay. Is that correct?
Kate, yeah.
Yes.
Kate, Jill, Megan, and Shayla. Yeah, so only one of us could go, where there are 5 of us on right now, right?
Yeah.
Are you okay if I leave and we don't have a vice chair, but could I ask Megan, as the oldest, not the oldest in age, but the
Thanks a lot.
serving,
Yeah.
the longest serving member of the Planning Commission to serve as chair while I pop over there?
Sure, that's fine with me if everyone else is okay with it.
That's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. I'll be back if I can.
Well, fight the good fight for us, Chapin, if needed.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure they know that we support what we sent over. Thanks.
Yep. And I'll put my video on because so I'm not just the disembodied voice.
So I had just brought up Chris Sedisak's letter, Megan, and I wanted to say a few things about it, but it's a public comment, and Chris is in the audience and can certainly speak to it. But I wanted to just say a couple things about the content. And I know this came in a little late. I emailed the Planning Commission this afternoon when we'd received this, so I don't know if everybody's had time to read and digest the whole thing. But Mr. Senisak is one of the applicants on the Catamount Golf project, which, as I just said, would be affected likely by this change. And there's a couple points that Chris brings that he can go into, and I just wanted to make everybody aware of what they were. There's a whole bunch of ways that the town and the DRB regulate growth and development, and one of the big ones is growth management. So this letter calls to your attention some of the work the Planning Commission recently did on growth management, and what the focus of that growth management revision process was. And I'm not going to relive it all right here, but I do think in general there was not a lot of discussion about the incentivization of open space. In that conversation, neighborhood layout and open space is incentivized in the growth management system, and was before and is now, but it wasn't really an element of focus. The second point just points to the residential zoning district being an area where sewer is provided, and the part of town where the 75% requirement is imposed is a place where sewer is not provided. And I would say that my version of this, when I've talked about this with citizens and others, is we are talking about a requirement in the residential zoning district in an area identified by the town as being supplied with the kinds of services that make growth possible, and planned for growth, planned for some level of change, with open space mentioned, but not quite as prominent in the plan as it is in the ag rural district. Mr. Senisak identifies some of the other goals of the residential zoning district, which I think the Planning Commission is familiar with. We are trying to get compact neighborhood development with diversity of housing types, and the inclusion of affordable housing, as he mentions, is incentivized in the district. And then I talked about this part a little bit when we went over the slides, but some of the record of the provision of open space through residential projects in the RZD in Williston has been a matter of setting aside land that's not developable. Those mapped pieces of open space contain streams and stream buffers and watershed protection buffers and other areas that are not developable. Sometimes what we see, I didn't have a good Creek's Edge map up there, but in Creek's Edge off North Williston Road or Keystone Estates off North Williston Road, you have developable land that's set aside because it's on the other side of the stream from the rest of the development and where the access is. So there are a lot of things that go into how much open space has been provided in these various projects, and certainly a great deal of it does have to do with pre-existing constraints. Callback in point 4 to affordable housing. This is a district where the town incentivizes affordable housing by providing a density bonus and by providing a higher score in the growth management system. And the commission may remember in the revised growth management system, the importance of affordable housing in this district and in the growth center was elevated significantly above some of the other criteria. And then I think calling out, that yes, making an open space requirement that's a quantitative amount on a parcel limits the flexibility of how a development can be laid out. At some point, depending on unit type, it starts to impact how many of what kind of units can be provided. And this is one of many examples in Williston's bylaws where there are goals that are sometimes in conflict with one another. Williston wants to protect open space and it wants to create opportunities for affordable housing. And I could add another dozen ands to that and probably find lots of ways that those are in tension with one another. So making it arguably harder to develop more houses in the RZD may run counter to some of the affordable housing goals for that same district. And lastly, the letter talks about some folks expressing some prejudices against affordable housing. And all I can say about that is I hear that too sometimes. I've heard things said that were about not the type of house, but the type of person that somebody thought might live there. And it seems to enter the conversation whenever the idea of affordable housing comes up. And I wanted to do the math on this. I hadn't been able to do it yet, but my educated guess is that for my little family of 3, at 100% median income, that's probably about what we looked like 5 years ago. I think we looked almost exactly like the county median for a family of 3. And so, two working adults with 1 kid and a couple of degrees between them. And I say that in one way to say, don't be so afraid of this affordable housing stuff. But at the same time, I want to say, everybody's got to have somewhere to live. And the town has goals related not just to housing people like I was 5 years ago, but lots of other people too, who may never reach that income level. And it is difficult and challenging when bias against people of a certain income bracket starts to enter into the conversation. I'd echo that. So that's everything I saw in the letter. It wasn't my letter that I wrote, and you can certainly get some more detail out of Chris on it. And I'll leave it up for now if there's a place anybody on the commission wants to go to clarify or ask more follow-up questions.
Chris, do you want to add anything or bring any other context to your letter?
I think that when I wrote this, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me, first of all, we've been doing this for about 40 years, and we've looked at a lot of parcels of land, and I'm all for maintaining open spaces because God knows we don't want Williston to look like New Jersey. However, I think we're various times have been so far away from that, it's not even funny. I think that the two things that strike me with the timing of this request, it's obvious to me, and Matt, tell me if I'm wrong or not, that there are no other applications for a big subdivision coming in at this time in the RZD that I know of. And so this request is pointed at this development, and that's fine. People have the right to appeal and approach things the way they want. What I would say to the Planning Commission is that having looked at so many pieces of land, one of the things that does not come up readily apparent in the analysis is that there's so much wetlands, there's so many steep slopes, there's so many natural resources that have to be taken out of the equation when you look at what is land that's usable and what is not. And what we found with the golf course is simply this, is that that golf course obviously has been redeveloped. And it is something that they've manicured it, they've mowed it, they have done everything they can to keep it, as a golf course. So naturally, you're not going to find the amount of mitigated acreage on that site that is not usable for development. And I think that we came out, initially looking at what we could do to offer a project. We did Chatham Woods, we did Chelsea Commons. They were all somewhat similar in nature. This for us was, after having talked to Ken Belleville and Matt many times, was a way of trying to incorporate all the work that you guys have done over the last 3-4 years in changing growth management. Because let's face it, you can propose something, but if you can't score with it, it's not worth much. A Brennan Woods, a South Village, a Pleasant Acres, if they came in front of you, in front of the DRB at this point, might not score very well by virtue of what they're not offering. So, the Catamount plan was an incorporation of everything that I've learned through going through your process. We went through it with Chelsea Commons back in the 90s. We did through with Chatham Woods just recently in the 2000s. And so the process has evolved, and it has done what I think the Planning Commission and the DRB wanted to see. They wanted to see control of growth, and I think they've done an admirable job of doing it. The question becomes and the reason I added that in my letter in regards to the affordable housing is that there's a lot of subterfuge that goes on. Most people will not come to a meeting and say, we don't want those people next to us. We want them someplace else. It's almost like they're throwaway people. And I personally had the opportunity to have, 3 people come up to me in the last 2 months and talk about this. And it's kind of flabbergasted me because I'm thinking, this is not going to do what you say it's going to do. And yet, they're coming at us for this project with the thought that, we want to cut you down in size. Make no bones about it. If you take 50% of a parcel and you set it aside, somebody's going to lose something somewhere. It's going to happen. So, the question becomes is the balancing act between offering homes, and I don't count homes that are affordable in those big 36-unit buildings that I see at Taft's Corners. We chose to try and offer something that was more mainstream. I don't think that 8-unit buildings belong in a site like Catamount. I think that single-family homes, 2s, 3s, and 4s, they work. So we're not adverse to increasing the amount of open space if that's what's necessary to mitigate concerns by others. But I think there's a balancing act here, and it's the town has to ask themselves the question, you've already got so much acreage set aside in the RZD, that's going to be it for the town. The core is almost developed out. There's not much left there. So if the thought is that you want to further constrain what is already there, I would suggest to you that without having changed the bylaw for many, many years, you've already done what you are setting out to accomplish now. I mean, most of these big developments, they're 40, 50, 60%. But these big developments at the same time, you wouldn't find again because, they're not going to get through the process. They're going to score poorly. and then, they're just going to be, chucked aside. So disappointed to see the kind of commentary about the affordable. We've done other year developments in other towns where it didn't seem to be such a problem, but we feel very strongly about it. We feel that it's a necessity. We feel as a parent who has 20 and 30-year-old children, that I wanted to give something back. I wanted people to have that ability to buy something of their own, and this was a perfect place to start. So.
Okay, thanks for the comments. I want to open this up to other comments and questions that other planning commission members may have. And we also have a couple members of the public here. So, but let's give commission members first shot at this. Sheila, go ahead.
So Chris, hi, I'm Sheila Livingston. I have a question, which is, I don't, if you have this information, given the proposal versus what you had planned, how much of the land is set aside now? Like, what would the actual acreage difference be?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. I thought we were around 22, 23%, something like that, for Catamount. I'm just running off memory here. It's not to say that we can't increase that. I know we could. There'll be a diminishment of units. That's really not as big a problem as is going from 22 to 50. At $600 a running foot for infrastructure, believe me, everything counts. And in order to offer the affordable, and to my knowledge, we're the only development that has been put on a piece of paper that was going to offer 35% of the project to be affordable. I think that, we have to watch everything that happens and that goes along with what we're losing. We made changes to that plan as a result of a commentary by Matt and Emily. And, I think it looked better and better and better. I think this is a process, and I don't think that you need to go to the point of taking 50% of anybody's land. And the other thing I would point out is that we're having this meeting, but there's a lot of people that own land in the RZD that don't know about this meeting at all. And so obviously they'll find out if you go further with this thought process. So I think that there is going to be a substantial change. I mean, if you just take the 30 acres that we would have had or have with the project being placed on it, and you basically take 15 of that away, you're gonna slice into. You forget about affordable housing, and then also given the fact that you've got a 40 unit maximum on any single egress road, you're going to chop down anything that's going to be built. It's just monetarily, it's not feasible.
Okay, thanks. Jill or Kate, do you have anything to add?
Not at this time.
Okay.
Same.
All right. Okay, so we have a lot of information here, and obviously any proposals that we put forward would go through public hearings. So, no one here should feel like this is a do or die moment. But I do want to offer a moment. If Matt, would you agree that it's appropriate to open this to other public comments?
Yeah, I think you want to make sure you hear from everybody, and
Right.
all we're looking for at the staff level is before the end of tonight, what's the direction the Planning Commission is looking for? Do you want to discuss at another meeting? Do you want to set a public hearing? Do you want to do anything else as we laid out in the memo?
Okay, so I would like to open it to other public members of the public in a moment. I would just kind of reveal my hand here in, I think what my goal for the, coming out of this evening would be is to is to hear from more of the public, whether that was through a hearing or possibly some kind of a survey, and to consider those large land parcels. And so definitely that's, and just for everyone to know that that is an option, that we can find out more, both from the public, and we can ask staff for additional information too. Okay, so I know we have several members of the public with us tonight. Would anyone like to make a comment? You can unmute yourself and indicate to me in some way that you would like to speak or ask a question.
I see a raised hand from Peggy Larson.
Okay, Peggy, go ahead.
Yeah, hi there. A very, very interesting discussion tonight. And while I can see Mr. Senesak's position, because he needs a profit on this and he needs to squeeze as much as he can, and I don't blame him. But what I didn't hear anything about was the increase in traffic. I live on Mountain View Road, and I'll tell you today, when I was trying to get out of my yard, I must have sat there for 10 minutes waiting to finally get out. And the traffic, I go for a walk every day, and unfortunately I have to walk somewhat on Mountain View until I can get down to Old Stage Road. And the traffic is just beyond believable. I'm used to traffic. I used to live in Sacramento. I've lived in some big cities, but I'd like to see some discussion on the traffic situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely make a note of that, and that would be a pretty standard part of evaluating, moving forward. That is a bit more of a project-specific question, rather than one of the key things about the Planning Commission is that we set kind of the big picture policies, and the actual sort of implementation of them is really up to the Development Review Board. But I certainly appreciate your comment, and the pattern, in a broad sense, patterns of development do have different types of impact on traffic. So that is certainly always in the back of our minds. And for this project in particular, you may be concerned about that. But I want to be careful to just remind us that this is not, this meeting is not an evaluation specifically of the Catamount project, right? It's
yes, I understand. I do.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so that's just kind of a little reminder for everyone. Okay, other comments? Terry, did I see you?
Yes. Yep. I sent a message saying I'd like to speak.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, I see that now.
Okay, great. Yeah, Terry Marin, I'm a Williston resident, and I'm a member of the Citizens for Responsible Growth group. And I just want to take a minute to thank all the folks at the planning office in town for doing such a great job on getting this all together and taking on the project of the proposed amendment that we made. And Matt and Emily and Melinda and Bonnie really put in a lot of time to presenting this. And I just want to say that our proposed amendment is kind of in line with the town plan to keep a rural character in Williston and to maintain quality of life. And I must say, it's interesting for Mr. Senesak to say that this project was focused on his project. Really, it wasn't. The group started back in January as a group of citizens that was concerned about the rate of growth that was happening in Williston. Really weren't aware, of the details of the Catamount project. Just people were watching Finney Crossing being built and seeing the Cottonwood Crossing development go through its steps of being passed on. So I think people were concerned. To some people it does look like New Jersey, and it just is a little alarming. It's not any kind of development that we've seen here. And at the last DRB meeting, there were 24 people at the meeting, which is pretty significant, mostly neighbors and people from the Mountain View area. And, you know, they were too concerned about the size of this project and that it wasn't in keeping with the surrounding neighborhoods and the, you know, the size of it and scope, and maybe a little bit greedy on trying to just get as much as you can out of a piece of land. But this project will set a precedent for continuing development down the road, which down Mountain View Road in Old Stage. I know that there are concerns in town about sewer and water, and that, you know, that's not going to be available for, at the rate that we're using it is today, that it's not going to last forever. So it are just a few owners of the people in the ZD area going to benefit from having these large scale, high density development, and then it'll run out and, oh, sorry, you know, there's no more. Some of the other things that really need to be looked at is, you know, yes, maybe the developer is missing out on, you know, profits of really developing it to the full extent, but the town is going to have to absorb the cost of, like Peggy said, the traffic. What are you going to do about Mountain View Road when 141 units are being built, and how many that we haven't heard from the school really about the impact, fire and emergency services. There's road maintenance infrastructure, that a lack of it for the traffic and the sewer. So there's a lot of things that the board needs to take into consideration, that, you know, it's going to cost the town because you're going to have to upgrade. So we just, as a group, Citizens for Responsible Growth, wanted to have the town just take a pause and really look at what is happening and where this town is going into the future, and can we kind of, you know, rein it in a little bit and really do some responsible growth, where people can have a quality of life, you know, not be, you know, back to back in the way that this this particular development and ones to go in the future. So we just think that it's good practice to have space for people that in their living communities. So again, it was not in reference to this amendment was not done for this development. It was just in general. So I would just like the planning board to consider this proposal and put it as a requirement, and to go forward in the RZD. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Any other?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Terry, I really appreciate your comments and everything that the group CRG is saying and doing, because I, like you, in watching Finney Crossing, and the Planning Commission knows, I'm not a fan of it. But I do have a question for you, and that Matt has said that the number of units will not change if we reduce this land by 50%. They will just have to put the same number of units more clustered together. So to me, I'm thinking, okay, well, we're still having the same amount of traffic coming from it. We're still having the same amount of people coming from it, whether by schools or for fire or safety or all that stuff. We're just having it in a smaller section. So I'm thinking, okay, well, now are they going to put a Finney Crossing building on that property? And is that going to be, would that be beneficial in your opinion, or the group's opinion? Or are you more trying to get at actually reducing the number of, you know, units? Or are you looking more for what a community looks like? You know, where Finney Crossing, I think, is very relatively unattractive? Are you looking for something that looks better? Or do you have any thoughts on that, or just?
Yeah, so I think that the idea is that, you know, it would be up to the developer whether to cram those 141 units into that same space, half the amount of acreage. You know, we're hoping that, you know, they would kind of, you know, what like I said, the DRB meeting, there were 24 people there, and the neighbors were quite concerned about the density and just the lack of elbow room and quality of life that the people would have. You know, that other, you know, developments in town have not been this intense, and the developers have seemed to been able to make a profit, and the community has enjoyed, you know, a development that is livable, that, you know, people can have their elbow room, and that, yeah, that it would have the developer look at, okay, what is the surrounding community look like? What does the neighborhoods look like next door? And they would work towards, you know, building a neighborhood like that. So that was our hopes, and to, you know, also to, you know, for conservation and wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors, you know, all that's very important. You know, it's, if you look at the map that's, you know, that in the presentation, you know, the corridors are disappearing, and the more houses you put in, you know, the less animals and are going to have to be able to move back and forth freely, more accidents, more, you know, with animals hitting deer and whatnot. Yeah, so that was our idea, was to kind of bring down the amount of intensity and density of houses in each one of these developments.
Kate, did you have any other comments or questions?
I guess my concern would be relying on a developer to consider that, and instead just putting as many units as they could in, you know, Finney Crossing buildings everywhere in the residential zoning district, because Finney Crossing is not in the residential zoning district. That is the Growth Center. So the residential zoning district is, I believe, supposed to look different than the Growth Center. So that would be my.
Yeah, the other developments in town where there were, you know, Matt had given as examples where they have, I mean, some of the land was undevelopable, but, you know, the developer did set aside land for the communities that they were creating for the enjoyment, you know, of just open space for quality of life. So
yeah, I mean, I live in Brennan Woods, and we saw, I don't know if Matt can pull that up, but the open space in Brennan Woods isn't completely contiguous, but I think it works as for quality of life, that is, possibly for animals, not as much, although the spaces are larger than they look in the picture. But I guess my concern is that if you took Brennan Woods and you took all those homes and you put them, you know, up at the top, or you made them apartment buildings and you put them at the top and the rest was, it would be different. The quality of life would be different, in my opinion, for the residents.
right, and I guess that was not, when we first made this proposal, we weren't thinking that the open space had to be on one end or the other. As you look at Brennan Woods here, there is a wildlife corridor from the bottom of the, you know, picture there. You know, there is a corridor of land, you know, that animals go through without running into a home or a road for the most part. Yeah, I mean, you know, some of the bigger pieces of land that are, this is 30 acres, so it's a little bit tighter, this particular development. I'm assuming, you know, down the road that the piece next to it will be developed as well. I don't think that's going to continue to be a 3-hole golf course forever. So you'll have another set of houses there as well. So, you know, just to, and this particular Catamount happens to be on the Cirque Highway, you know, piece of land. So there is that open space land. So that's, but I guess our idea will to take all those houses. I don't think that they were just going to be crammed all into one section. You know, Brennan Woods, I can see there's open space all around. So that would be a good alternative.
If I can jump in here for a moment, if anyone who isn't actively speaking could please mute yourself. We're getting a lot of feedback and other random noises. That would be.
Oops, that might have been me. Sorry, Megan.
It's okay. And I realize there's, you know, always a little, you know, audio question in these kinds of meetings. Okay, well, thank you so much, Kate and Terry, for that conversation. I think it was pretty illuminating. I do just want to be very careful about how we talk about quality of life. I know, Terry, that is a term that you've brought up quite a lot in previous meetings with us as well. And I would just like to put out there that that is a really subjective notion, as far as, you know, each person may have their own values on quality of life. And so having one particular vision of what it means to have elbow room or a backyard, while that may certainly represent quality of life to some people, that's not the case for everyone. And regardless of what people think of the aesthetics of Finney Crossing, in many other senses, that that living configuration does represent quality of life to some people. So, you know, it's a much denser style of life, but many people are seeking that and value that. So I do want to just be careful about our language. And in some cases, what we're talking about is density. In other cases, what we're talking about is really a combination of density and the layout of a particular development or an area. And so there are, and I also just want to kind of put a little plug in here, and maybe Matt can flesh this out a bit, is the, you know, there's a lot in between. There's a lot in between Brennan Woods and Finney Crossing that can look aesthetically very beautiful, can give people a chance to have outdoor space, and yet still also be quite compact and preserve some of those wildlife corridors and so forth. Terry, I did see your message, and I appreciate the rural character comment. You know, again, though, bear in mind that that we have a small part of the town that is that does have water and sewer service, and you know, is the center that we have identified as the place where growth will go. And you know, apart from the growth center itself, which is more dense. And so that has been, you know, if we envision everyone having 2 acres, 4 acres, or whatever we might imagine as the perfect size, we would have a very sprawling town, and the traffic would actually be worse. It would be more costly for individuals and for those town services. So concentrating residential uses in the town does have some advantages. And I just want to, in a very neutral way, I'm not speaking on behalf of Mr. Senecal or anything, taking any particular position. I'm just trying to broaden the conversation a little bit here, because there are alternative layouts and plans and aesthetic ways of mixing different kinds of densities and styles of house. And we, in our town plans, say, yes, rural character, but we also are in a very privileged position, actually, in the state of Vermont to have opportunities for growth and a demand for growth. Most towns in Vermont would love to have people clamoring to move to them. Many of those towns are losing population. And so that is, something that we want to manage, and we're in a good position in the sense that we have, as a town, we have some power to manage what our growth looks like because we are in this privileged position. So I just wanted to kind of throw out some of those broader considerations because I think that, partly I don't want to just focus on the one project, but also to kind of give everyone a little bit of maybe some food for thought. So I see that Chapin is back and Emily is here. And so Matt, would you want to give us a suggestion on how to proceed at this point?
Megan?
Can I jump in? We also had Ruben wanted to speak and Joshua wanted to
I'm
speak as
sorry.
well.
I didn't look at the chat. Okay, let's see. So, okay, I missed out that Ruben wanted to speak. I'm only seeing some people at a time. So Ruben, if you'd like to chime in, please do.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Megan. Well, first of all, I think I'm going to approach this I'm just going to follow suit what Megan said, is that taking the broader perspective of this, because this does have a lot of implications to everyone. I am from the academia, so I'm going to approach it from the academia where, you look at the data, what does it tell you, and, look at the impact and the influence. So the quantitative side of things, so to speak. And so, and certainly, again, as a broad stroke to this, maybe looking at it how we define open space, what is the definition of an open space? What is the purpose of an open space? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has a definition for what an open space is. And so, and I think Matt did a great presentation on, if you build an open space like this, if you intentionally design and develop an open space to be like this, how will that impact, enhancing the beauty and environmental quality of whatever neighborhood it's in? So I think it's in the intentionality and design, of course, within parameters of which we would like to assure Williston to be going towards. I guess my question is, what does the town of Williston want to do? Let's look at our mission and vision, or the plan of Williston, and look at it from a long range planning, and not just this we're not only looking at the next 5 years, but let's look at it from, for the next decade or more than 20 years or so. So I think that we need to get, my point being, for the academia, is looking at it from a very foundational perspective to try and have this dialogue and question. It's okay to question things. It's okay to be uncomfortable having these conversations, and that's part of the democracy where we live in. It's just, getting down to the foundational concept of what is open space, and what is it designed for, and not, you can have an open space that's just one long strip of land, open space land, just what Matt said. But what does that do, really? Nothing. It's just for the purpose of having an open space. So I think we have to just be more intentional and deliberate with how and when and why and when we define open space, and what the parameters around that would be.
Okay, thanks so much, Ruben. And it's been really, I've appreciated your contributions to this commission recently. And so thank you again. Okay, and did I miss out on someone else who had a comment? Oh, Josh and Peggy.
Joshua,
okay.
And then Peggy Larson also just raised her hand.
Okay, I'm sorry. For some reason, I can't see hands being raised. So Joshua, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, this is actually Dave Westman. I'm in Brennan Woods,
Oh.
and no, it's okay. I think Joshua is my son. He was using my phone for Zoom meetings. It's fine. I just wanted to say thank you for this discussion, and that I have been following along with Terry and her group on responsible growth, and I want to support a lot of what she had to say. I also want to just reflect on the fact that you know, back in the 90s, we used to call provisions like this akin to smart growth, and that, you know, open space is but one small piece of a good smart growth plan. And that, you know, I do believe that it should be followed up with requirements around density, and that it should comport to the town's overall vision for how it wants to look. And I fully support dense urban centers and you know, wide open wild places. I've spent a lot of my life living in urban areas like New York and San Francisco and Westchester County, and moving to Vermont is a real privilege. And I'm a little disappointed in how Williston is sort of taking its responsibility to take that smart growth ethic and put it into its planning. You know, we didn't come here to be in a, you know, construction site. You know, the adage of living in New York for 10 years, it'd be a great place to live if they ever finished building it. And you come to expect that when you live in New York. And I guess I get worried when I hear about all of the projects that are being contemplated. You know, one of them is Yes in My Backyard. You know, we're looking at years and years of continued construction. And, you know, I think of quality of life as being not getting run over by, you know, large construction vehicles when I'm riding my bike at 5 o'clock at night. You know, I understand that there's traffic and commuters and all of that, but constant construction noise and traffic is definitely something that we need to consider. And I know that that is, you know, not 100% going to be addressed by this, you know, 50% open space requirement, but it's a start. And I guess that's kind of my perspective, is that it's not the only solution, but it's the start of one. And I think that we need to do collectively much better at embracing all of those, you know, old credos of what smart growth looks like and applying it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I appreciate your contribution. Peggy, you had another comment, and then I do see that Shayla has something to say as well. And you need to unmute yourself, Peggy. Yeah, you're muted. Thank you. Okay, start over.
Just a short comment. Every time I drive past Finney Crossing by there, I just kind of, I don't know, it's just awful. It's boring to me. But what I was just going to say is how many more Finney crossings can we build in this town before the town loses its charm, or loses its what it was set out to be? I don't know. Finney Crossing to me looks like some of the places that I've been in New Jersey, in Massachusetts, in Boston. I kind of like the character of Williston. It's beautiful here. And I guess that's my question. How many more Finney Crossings can we make in this town before the town is no longer Williston? That's just my comment. Thank you again.
Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, and just as a sort of practical matter, we pretty much are out of land in the growth center. So I don't think there will be any more. I don't think there will be any more Finney crossings. Matt can probably speak to that more accurately. But okay, so we have a couple other comments I'm seeing now in the chat. And Shayla, I will get to you, but I want to cover the rest of our public members. Dwight, did you have a comment?
Yes, it's Donna. Can you hear me?
Oh, Donna. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. you come through
That's okay. It's under my husband,
yeah.
my alias.
Okay. And can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Donna Roser, and I live here in Williston. And just a couple quick comments. So one of my thoughts on something I'm worried about is that the number of units basically will be the same with this amendment. It's just that the density will be higher. So I'm not sure if it will address the concerns that I know a lot of people have had. And Megan, with all due respect, it is a privilege living here. But I think with that privilege, we also have a responsibility to the current residents. And I think listening to the concerns, and I think the concerns that I've heard are, traffic, schools, are we going to get to the point where we're going to be having to build more schools or building on additions? Services, overextension of our services that we currently have. So as much as it's a privilege, I think we also have a responsibility in listening to the concerns of the population. And I know sometimes they don't always coincide with the town plan. And, I'm not saying the town plan's right or wrong, but I think sometimes it's not in line with what a lot of people think or what we would like to see. Affordable housing, I know Chris had said that he heard some comments negative about affordable housing, and I have to say I hear just the opposite. In a lot of the conversations I've had or gotten together with people, affordable housing is what people want. It's a positive. We want to see people being able to afford housing, and certainly Williston is a desirable location. Unfortunately, probably cost-wise, a lot of people can't live here, unfortunately. And I think my last comment, I don't want to be too negative here, but I think affordable housing is a red herring. I went to many meetings with Finney Crossing and whatnot, and they talk about affordable housing. And, affordable housing in an apartment might be $1,500. To me, that's not affordable housing. So I have no idea what type of housing prices Chris is having in there. But even at a quote unquote affordable housing, I'm kind of wondering if that's really affordable. If we're talking about a 450,000 home or 400,000, my 30-year-old kid can't afford that. So anyways, that's just my brief comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Donna. And you may have joined after our earlier discussion of the definitions of affordable housing, and rest assured that we do use a federally defined but locally specific measure. Ruben has also been suggesting to us some additional ideas about using living wage, and so I'm sure at some point we will. The affordable housing task force that's going to be in the pipeline will look more at that.
Right. I do know those stipulations or whatnot, but it was funny. I was at a meeting for, I think it might have been Cottonwood, and there was a gentleman there, a lawyer, and he said, well, based on the affordable housing, if somebody's, somebody's a service worker, they're going to have to work 2 full-time jobs to afford something affordable housing in Williston. So I know there's all that criteria, and it sounds great, but is it really, practical? But anyways, thank you.
Lots of good questions. Thank you for your comments. Terry, did you have an additional comment, or was that from before?
Yeah, no, that was an additional comment. I just was thinking about the affordable housing issue as well. So Matt can correct me if I'm incorrect, but affordable housing is kind of misleading. because it takes, numbers that they use, and you have to be making $90,000 per year to be able to afford an affordable house in Williston or Chittenden County. And that's 50% of the people on the upper half of the wage scale. So the reason why this particular Catamount golf course is being able to have such a high density of housing is because they are including affordable housing, which is a misnomer. It just doesn't, it's not real. It really, Ruben brought up about a livable wage housing is, I think, more what people are thinking about when they hear affordable housing. So giving this incentive to developers to add affordable housing when the houses are going to start, I think this was over in Northridge, the affordable house was $300,000, which is not affordable to the average Vermonter. So really it is kind of misleading. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, thank you. And Matt, maybe we can have you respond in a moment, but I also see that Chelsea has her hand raised. Chelsea, you want to introduce yourself and
don't forget
your
Shayla.
comment?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Oh, and Shayla, yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Chelsea.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I jumped on the call late. I'm commuting, but I just wanted to say thank you for hearing this amendment. And my family, we relocated here. I grew up in Essex, but we brought our family to Williston and moved here a couple of years ago. And I know I missed a lot of the meeting. I just wanted to publicly speak my support for this amendment. For me, as a person with a young family looking to, my daughter starting kindergarten and the growth of the town being a concern, at least for this amendment, for me, we're not, we're trying to be responsible in the growth. So I just wanted to voice my support. I'm sorry I jumped on late, but thank you for hearing it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Shayla, at last, do you want to go ahead?
No, I appreciate all the comments. I continue to be concerned since sort of when we started this conversation that, like Donna said, I want to hear the concerns of the group that brought this amendment forward, and I continue to be concerned that this amendment doesn't actually address the concerns that they have. So I just want to make sure we are discussing and debating the right thing. And sorry, I'm going to say his name is Josh, and I know he told me that's his son's name, but the gentleman who
David, yeah.
David, thank you. David brought up that maybe it's the first step, but I guess I'm not totally satisfied by that. I want to really understand more of a root of what the concern is and what could be done to address that concern. And then I also just want to say I am feeling a little bit like this is about one project, and I hear that the amendment is general, and obviously it reads general, and we are not the DRB, but I want to just raise concern that it feels like it is about this one project, and that it's concerning to me.
Okay, thank you. I have to say, I think this is one of the most lively Planning Commission meetings I have been at in 10 years of serving on the commission. So I really, I'm thrilled with all of our participation. And this is really heartening for those of us on the commission who, welcome public input and often don't get much of it. So this has been really terrific. Chapin, shall I hand this back over to you, or how would you like to proceed? And also, we could hear from Matt if he has any responses or clarifications he'd like to make.
Thanks, Megan. I'd like to insert a comment that Emily made a fantastic presentation to the select board, and they have voted to hold public hearings on both types of town plan amendments that we had forwarded to them. And I took notes on the kinds of things they were interested in. I would like to say this: we're looking at a specific potential bylaw change. That the Williston's comprehensive town plan is supposed to set out the town's, collectively, the town's vision for the future, looking out 20 years or so. And one of the parameters we have to keep in mind is that, like the region, we have significant development pressure. And building sewers brings more of it, building highways brings more of it, having an airport and a train station provide additional transportation options. Being near Burlington has another factor. So if you look at it from the point of view that we're going to have significant development pressure, what is our vision? And the vision for affordable housing is almost perhaps at odds with the vision for a rural character. And we sort of have to figure out how do we have both as much as possible. And one of the things I always look back to is that in Europe, where they got more population earlier and had to deal with crowding, they wound up with cities that had pretty concentrated development and then farmland in between. And partly that allowed for food to be grown locally and brought into the market. But that style of development has not been the norm in the United States, where we sort of are more car-based and assuming people, we have times subdivisions. So we sort of have a conflict about how we do things. But what I wanted to say is that the idea of clustered development, however we do it, whether it's by saying a certain amount should be open or that just development should be clustered, it probably does the best, it's the best compromise at the moment for how to have both some density in response to the growth pressure and have some rural feeling, rural character. And so it's not a plain thing to me, and I'm really glad for all the input, and I think we need to have more discussion. Matt, do you have suggestions for next steps?
Sure, a couple of things, and I do want to note, I saw Terry had a hand raised again, so I'll try to be brief so you can get back to her and any other public comment. One thing Megan had asked for before I go into procedure was the discussion of affordable housing, and the thing I want to be clear about is what does the town currently incentivize, and what the town currently incentivizes is housing that is affordable for people making 100% of the area median income or more. So the first kind of affordable housing that is incentivized in Williston is housing that would be thought of as affordable for the top half of income earning families in the county. When you incentivize, as Williston does, housing that is affordable at 80% of the area median income, which has been very difficult for the town to get almost any of it all, then you're incentivizing housing that's affordable for more than half of the people or families in the region. And so the lower that number, you see 65% in Burlington, the more people you're talking about being able to afford that housing. So, 100% of area median, incentivizing the creation of housing that's affordable for essentially the top half of income earning families in the county. Believe it or not, if that sort of housing was not incentivized in Williston, very little of it would be constructed. Williston is an expensive town, and most of the new housing in Williston that is constructed is only affordable for maybe the top third or the top 25% of income earning families in the county. So I think it's important to understand what that is definitionally and what it is and what's being achieved and what isn't. There is a lot more to the picture in terms of how does housing become affordable in a growing community. One way it becomes affordable is it ages. And so there's filtering that happens where a market rate unit ages for a while. Maybe it's not in the brand shiny new neighborhood, and then that house becomes more affordable, or it becomes more affordable because it's subject to market competition from other new market rate units that are being built in the area. But I just wanted to be clear that when we say affordable at 100% median, absolutely what that means is affordable for the top half of income earners in the county and not affordable for the bottom half. And yet that is accomplishing something in an expensive place like Williston. So that's all I wanted to clarify. I think, Terry, you did a good job summarizing the numbers around affordable housing, and I just wanted to mention that part. And then I can move on to procedure, or I don't know, Chapin, if you want to round up the rest of the comments, and then I can sort of ask what the pleasure of the commission is in terms of going forward on this.
I missed some of the discussion, so I don't want to say anything. And Joshua, or his father, David, I guess, has a question, but I think we probably shouldn't keep answering questions that aren't directly about this. And so I didn't want to try to summarize what's been said. I feel as though we have some digesting to do, and I would ask your opinion and Megan's opinion, or the planning commissioner's opinion, if that's true. Are we ready to do anything? Are we ready to ask for more information, or where are we?
My sense is that we definitely have some digesting to do. I think we probably want to, I feel like we probably should do a bit more public outreach. Given the attendance tonight and the number of questions and the participants, I definitely think that it would be good for the Planning Commission to hear more from the public. I'm not sure what format that would be, but I think this is an important question and an important issue, and it bears some careful deliberation, not rushing into anything. So that would be my summary, is that there's some really strong and important points on sort of both sides of this open space question, and we should honor those by hearing more and thinking more about it.
I also think in terms of timing of this, had we been able to have had that density forum that we had planned just before COVID got serious, some of the stuff in here that I think is coming up and being stacked and layered around quality of life and affordable housing and space, and I think that would have been really helpful to inform some of this. And so maybe we need to think about going back to that and doing it virtually, or because it does seem like there's a lot of opinions and a diversity of opinions, and I think we have some information from our plans and things, but I think we really do need to figure out what our tone is and our vision in terms of some of these things that do impact each other.
I'm so glad you reminded us of that, Jill. I totally agree. And I also think that some of the questions that came up tonight might also be part of a form-based code review, and some more information on that in terms of layout and kind of the architectural side of things. And what does quality of life mean? So that's a really good point. Definitely agree.
Could I just mention one last thing?
Sure.
Go ahead, Terry.
Is there another time that I can speak?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to reiterate again that our group was formed from a front porch forum post that happened in January. I had no knowledge really of the club development. We just formed because we were a group of concerned citizens about the amount of construction happening in town. I don't know if it was one of the board members that said that couldn't help think that this group was not focusing on this particular development. I just want to say once again, we did not. I don't know Mr. Senesak. I have no connection about the golf course. I saw a few houses being built in the front lots. Only thing I knew about it, we started gathering at, I think it was the end of January, beginning of February. And it just happened to be that this was the development that was happening in town. So there was no direct correlation between citizens' responsible growth and this development. I just want that everybody is clear about that. I want to make sure that doesn't get spread that we formed because of this particular development. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can bring us back also to Shayla's comment, you know, the open space amendment that we were looking at tonight was sort of one way to interpret the concerns that were raised by CRG. And so basically, you know, they brought their concerns to us and we kind of applied the planning filter to them and tried to think about like, okay, well, what would a mechanism be to address some of those concerns? And I agree with Shayla that that might not be quite the right tool for the job. And so that's again where I think we do need more conversation and more, and also to learn about maybe some other mechanisms that could, you know, recognize the desire for the rural character and preserve that, but within a context of also realizing that you know, there is a private real estate market out there, and that growth happens. And given that it does happen, we have an interest in controlling where and how and in what it looks like and so forth. So so Chapin, I believe we're pretty much at time. And I don't know if you want to kind of sum things up and move us forward, or if you have directions for staff at this point.
I was going to ask Matt if he could check with the CCRPC if they would have any guidance for us in this area. And also, I feel as though South Burlington is farther down the road of grappling with the competition between open space and development. And it sort of caused a lot of rift and difficulty for them in the last year or two. And I wonder if we can learn from their pain in a sense. So my suggestion would be that this was not an action item anyway. We were reviewing the draft and deciding whether we wanted to go ahead with it. I think the answer is we are not ready to go ahead, nor are we ready to cancel it, if I'm reading people right. And so we'd like to have more discussion. And Matt, if you could figure out a way to bring us some relevant information that would help us further that discussion. And I too am just going to start talking with more people in Williston about this to sort of get more of a handle on what Williston's current residents have as a vision for their town, given the development pressure that it's under. And I also want to remind folks that at our July meeting, I've asked Matt to add to the agenda the election of officers, and that we have, and that anybody who's interested, you can let me know, or you can just nominate yourself at the meeting. I'm happy to step aside or to continue as chair, and I think we should have a vice chair.
So Chapin, I have a couple of notes I'd like to go over and how I see this moving, and if that helps. Okay, so you've asked for a little bit more information. I think some of it's about how other communities are balancing this, in particular, some examples from South Burlington. The other piece I would add, and sort of a commentary that was running through my mind as I watched everybody work through this tonight, is there's a lot that's about, in this conversation, that's about design, that's about how a subdivision looks and how it's laid out. And it's always kind of struck me that there's very little in the way of design controls in Williston's residential zoning district. So in fact, you know, Finney Crossing in the residential zoning district has had to conform to a fairly significant number of design criteria and design review by the Historic and Architectural Advisory Committee and a whole bunch of things. And yet, you know, it's still not satisfactory to everybody. Houses and buildings in the residential zone, they have to meet some setbacks and height limits, but they can be built any way somebody wants to build them. And although some of the standards in the RZD may pull for a particular type of subdivision layout, the chapter's fairly light on affirmative language about this is the kind of layout we want to see. So, you know, some of the commentary Emily and I worked on in relation to the layout of the Catamount Golf Course when we made our first round of pre-application comments had to do with just looking at some good planning practices for creating nice streetscapes and neighborhoods and some suggestions of how that project could be tweaked to do that. But we really had very little in the bylaw to base those comments on. It was more, well, you know, textbook planning says it would work better or could work better this way or that way. So leaving aside the pending amendment for a moment, I would say that there's a part of this conversation that's about layout and even building design. Do you want the RZD to continue to be a place where houses are allowed to have garages facing the street, for example? You know, most houses in the RZD do have garages facing the street. There are communities that want a design that doesn't have that. In fact, there's a lot of South Village and South Burlington that you'll notice that absence of garages when you look up from Spear Street at some of those houses. They're there, but they're on the side. There are other things about overall layout that can be addressed. I think the question that's raised by the idea of setting aside open space has led to a question of, is this the right units per acre density for this district? Is the incentive of more density for 100% median affordable housing the right incentive given where the town feels it is? So there's a broader discussion, and I think you can still have a focused conversation about a bylaw amendment like this without maybe doing the whole thing. But I sense that the commission's looking to broaden that out a little bit and ask itself some bigger questions about what its vision for the future of the RZD and especially the remainder of developable parcels in the RZD really is. So we can prepare a little more information for you about how some other communities have addressed this. We can offer you some other general areas where we think, based on what we're hearing from the commission and the citizens, where we think this bylaw might be able to be improved, you know, within the bounds of what the town plan says it ought to be. There's probably an even bigger conversation that happens when the next town plan is discussed, which is what should that town plan say about the rest of this district that has been planned for essentially suburban residential growth of one kind or another for the last 40 years or so. So I'll leave that at that, and all I would say is we probably won't have this all ready for you at the very next meeting. It sounds like that's a good meeting to do our fiscal year housekeeping, officers election, introduce the annual report, and there may be time to talk parking at that meeting. I also want to spend a little bit of time with the Planning Commission at the next meeting talking about the next fiscal year's work plan and what we think that might look like. And I have a few things to say about that, but I would say we can probably bring this back to you in late July, early August to continue this conversation. So I don't want to commit to a date. I want to talk to our staff a little bit about what else we'd like to put into it for you. And then focus next meeting on those things I talked about. The other thing I wanted to mention, well, two things. One is that we are going to see our work plan shift to some pretty heavy involvement in the form-based code in the Growth Center. So the Unified Planning Work Program has been approved. And in total, between Williston's money and an 80% federal transportation dollar match, we have a $125,000 form-based coding project for the Growth Center that is a go, starting first day of the next fiscal year. So it's not that we won't have some committees and task force working on that, but reading the Planning Commission, I know we've got some members who are going to want to have time to work on some of the activities that will go into that coding project, which I do hope addresses some of what we're hearing in terms of concerns about what new development in places like Finney Crossing looks like. And, you know, while there's not another Finney Crossing, there's a large Taft Corners area to redevelop, and there is a 55-acre undeveloped parcel where we used to think Essex Alliance Church was going to go, and that's in the Growth Center too. So there's still some potential there. So we can bring you more on RZD. We can't do it right next time, but I'll work on it and try to make it part of the work plan that we talk about next time. Last thing, I just wanted to note that it's 9:15 and I have not left for class. I appreciate everybody's flexibility over the last 9 months as I've worked through that final year of graduate school. I am done. I'm all yours on Tuesday nights now. So very much appreciate that, and thanks to the rest of the staff, especially Emily, for driving the bus so frequently when I had to bail out to school. And that's all I've got.
Thank you,
great.
Matt.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yes, congratulations. And I'd like to add to the list of things that we are probably going to be doing, that the select board will be scheduling hearings for the town plan amendments, and that many of us may want to attend to answer questions, to hear comments, and so forth. So if I could ask Matt that we make sure to do the housekeeping of organizational stuff, which we probably only need 10 minutes on July 7th. And I think we can get through the parking. I think we've all reviewed it enough times that we should be able to go through the parking things fairly quickly. And then everything else you said makes sense, and which means to all of you from the public and Chris Senesac as well, thank you for your input on this topic. We're not going to let it go. We're going to pick it up, but it's going to be after a hiatus of either a month or 6 weeks. And thank you, Melinda, for making the presentation and doing the analysis, the GIS analysis. That was really, really helpful to turn an abstract question into a real thing we could understand.
Yeah, you're welcome, and sorry I wasn't here early enough to actually present it. And thanks, Matt, for doing that.
Okay, any final comments from commissioners? Any final comments from anyone? Okay, thank you all very much. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Megan, seconded by Jill. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we are adjourned at 9:17. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.